Micah Bell III was born in 1860 to his father, Micah Bell Jr., and an unnamed mother. Both his father and grandfather, Micah Bell Sr., were ruthless outlaws. Although it's unclear on where Micah was born, he and his father did temporarily work on a ranch in Crawford County, Ohio in 1877 when he was in his late teens. It was during their stay here that the father-son duo would commit at least Micah's first horrific crime. Later detailed in a newspaper clipping found at a small camp inhabited by Micah, we find out that the pair not only robbed the ranch from which they were employed, but also killed the family that owned it, Roscoe and Jean Briggs, by slitting their throats and hanging them from the rafters. Micah Bell Jr. had a second son, Amos. Amos committed crimes with his family, but mainly tried to keep the violence to a minimum. Although a criminal himself, he and Micah seemed to be polar opposites. At one point, although the circumstances are unclear, Amos fell out with both his father and his brother, prompting his father into almost killing him. Having enough of this way of life, Amos seeks something more pure. He left his immediate family, married a lady, and later had 2 daughters. In a return letter addressed to Micah, Amos declared that he still loved his brother, but because of the guilt for living the life the way that they did, he had turned to God and swore to protect his daughters from any evil in the world. He also warned him not to approach himself or his family at their new home near the waters of San Francisco, California. Micah's father was wanted in 5 separate counties for murder, something which Micah boasted about, as if he was proud of his father's achievements. Micah Bell Jr. passed some time before 1899, although the events and location are still unclear. Following the breakup of his family, Micah would continue a life of crime. He met up with a pair of outlaws, Cleet and Joe, who saw him as their leader, thus forming his first posse. He would also separately meet another man named Norman. Norman was married to a lady named Maddie, and the pair had a young son. Norman was a petty criminal whom Micah took under his wing somewhat. The two attempted a bank robbery somewhere in the south, which didn't quite end as well as they had hoped for. The pair fell out. Although he would continue his criminal ways with Cleet and Joe, eventually, for reasons unknown, he would disband from the two, now running solo. Later, in 1898, at a bar in Crenshaw Hills, the Grizzlies, Micah was enjoying a drink when in walked notorious outlaw Dutch Van der Linde, whom Micah instantly recognized. Dutch was attempting to sell some stolen gold that he, alongside other members of his gang, had taken from some unfortunates. The deal went sour, as the buyers attempted to steal from the lone traveller. Micah Bell, for reasons unclear at this point, stepped in and saved Dutch from meeting a violent end. Following these actions, Dutch welcomed him with open arms into the Van der Linde gang. Although only being newly introduced to the gang, Micah would choose to berate the other gang members, as opposed to making a good impression. This didn't sit well with anyone, in particular Arthur Morgan and Hosea Matthews. The only one who would take a shine to Micah was Dutch Van der Linde himself. Dutch didn't seem to acknowledge Micah's tormenting ways, and only seemed to see that he was an experienced outlaw and excellent gunslinger, 2 traits that he felt would fit in perfectly in this band of outlaws. The women of the gang, in particular, despised him, but according to Micah, a young Jenny Kirk took quite a liking to him, even claiming that the pair had spent a night together. He also had a bit of an unhealthy obsession with Jack's mother, Abigail Roberts. Over the coming months, the gang would perform small burglaries before setting their sights on something much bigger. A ferry stationed in the docks of Blackwater, thought to be carrying around $150,000 destined for the local bank. The old guard, Arthur Morgan and Hosea Matthews, were brewing something in town at the same time, which looked increasingly promising, but Dutch, with Micah in his ear, chose the ferry instead, as although it was riskier, the payout was significantly larger. According to Javier Escuela, during an aftermath talk with Arthur, the beginning of the heist went relatively smoothly, allowing them to collect the takings easily, but seemingly in an instant, the entire job turned for the worst. The Pinkerton Detective Agency, who were a force instructed to wipe out the gangs of the Old West, got wind of the attempted robbery beforehand and showed up almost immediately to put an end to the gang's actions. This caused an intense firefight between the Van der Linde gang and the agents on both the ferry itself and the streets of Blackwater, which led to the wounding and loss of many. Dutch, very much out of character at this time, took a young girl named Hattie McCourt hostage. Unfortunately, Dutch killed the poor girl with a gunshot to the head. John Marston was wounded on the job, but it only seemed minor. Sean Maguire and Matt Callender were captured by the agents and taken into custody, and both Davy Callender and Jenny Kirk were fatally wounded. Both died during the gang's escape. This came to be known as the Blackwater Massacre. Following the disaster that was the Blackwater ferry heist, the gang were forced to flee north to the mountains of Amberino, with the law hot on their heels. Dutch Van der Linde sent Micah to scout ahead in search of shelter for the gang. He came across a homestead currently occupied by the rivaling O'Driscoll gang. After dealing with the gang members, Micah came across the real occupant of the home, Sadie Adler. Sadie, obviously distraught at the home invasion and the death of her husband, Jake, was in a manic state. Micah's behaviour towards her at this time, his laughing and tormenting, is apathetic. This type of action is called schadenfreude, and apologies if I mispronounce that. Upon returning to Colter, when given the locations of their bunks, Micah complained about his, showing us that he had both racist and homophobic tendencies. He makes more prejudicial remarks towards Lenny a short time later, right before the gang launch an assault on an O'Driscoll hideout not too far away. This continued during the robbery of the Cornwall train, where he condescends to Lenny a little more. After the events of the Adler Ranch, Dutch ordered Micah to bury Sadie's husband, possibly as a receipt for starting the fire that burnt their residence to the ground. But if you return later, you'll see no grave. Micah didn't bother. When the snow melted enough and the gang travelled south towards Horseshoe Overlook, Dutch sent Micah and Lenny to scout on ahead, making sure that the Pinkertons hadn't headed in the same direction. Micah takes this as an opportunity to begin drinking instead of scouting, and the pair end up in the western tourist town of Strawberry. The reason for this is that Micah wanted to reunite with his former friends whom he'd failed the bank heist with earlier, Norman. After more drinking in what was supposed to be an alcohol-free town, Micah, Lenny, Norman, and a few others, who turn out to be the O'Driscoll boys, challenged each other to five-finger fillet. At first, it's all fun and games until a drunken argument broke out between Micah and a few of the O'Driscoll boys, leading to the death of two of them. Although Lenny managed to escape, Micah isn't as fortunate, and both himself and one of the O'Driscolls are placed under arrest, with Micah being on trial for double homicide, punishable by hanging. At this moment in time, he was sharing his cell with the O'Driscoll. Something to make note of here is that both Micah and Lenny were fairly new to the Van der Linde gang. They'd only been running with them for a few months. As Arthur stated to Charles a little earlier back at Colter, The two gangs hadn't crossed each other much as of late. It's quite possible that the O'Driscolls that Michael and Lenny were drinking with had no idea that they were part of the rivaling Van der Linde gang. After Lenny's arrival back to camp, Arthur is told by Dutch to rescue Micah from his holding cell in Strawberry, and although reluctant, he follows the order. During the rescue, Micah immediately kills the O'Driscoll. The reason for this could be that the rival gang member may have recognised Arthur as being part of the Van der Linde gang, and maybe Micah was thinking long term, hoping to potentially work alongside Colm and his boys. The O'Driscoll gang definitely resemble Micah's way of doing things, and he knows this. Killing the jailed rival was just tying up loose ends. Micah opted to slay his way through the entire town instead of making a quick escape. He claims he does this to not only deal with his former friend Norman for not busting him out of his cell, but to retrieve his precious twin double-action revolvers. But maybe there's something more to this. As Arthur and Micah battle their way through the streets of Strawberry, Micah continuously yells Arthur's name, using both his first and surname over and over. This is possibly to implicate Arthur for the murders for anyone that may survive the fight. His jealousy and general dislike of Arthur being Dutch's right-hand guy instead of him may be the reason behind this. After all is said and done, and the pair had escaped a brutal firefight, Micah returned to a small camp he'd set up just outside of Strawberry prior to the events, as he didn't want to return to the gang quite yet, believing that Dutch may be angry at him for making such a mess of things. He invites Arthur to join him there at a later time. At his camp, Micah tells Arthur of a stagecoach robbery that they can hit, running off the information that the jailed O'Driscoll had spilled. The heist was originally pulled off with ease, but not before being ambushed by the O'Driscolls once more. This time, Micah is forced, alongside Arthur, to put down as many of them as he can. Some of the rival gang members escape the fight. Although they may not have known that it was Micah aboard the stagecoach at first, they certainly did by now. He couldn't hide his affiliation with the Van der Linde gang anymore. If you choose to revisit Micah's small camp after he's left, you'll come across not only the newspaper clipping detailing the double homicide of the Briggs family, but an old wanted poster for Dutch Van der Linde. This was in Micah's possession, and is a strong indication that he was prepared to betray the gang from the very beginning. After making good with the delivery from the stagecoach robbery, Micah returned to Horseshoe Overlook, and although he's very apologetic to Dutch, he still continued to be a nuisance towards the rest of the gang. A little time later, the gang's cook, Pearson, tells of how he's met a couple of O'Driscolls and how their leader, Colm, wants to meet and end this feud. Micah saw this as an opportunity to get in good with the rival gang, pressuring Dutch into agreeing to the meet. Himself, Dutch and Arthur all head out. As he watches over the interaction, Arthur is kidnapped by a few of the O'Driscolls. It's quite possible that Micah knew this was going to happen, suspecting Arthur wouldn't survive, and hoped to take his place as the new top gun of the Van der Linde gang. We see this jealousy of Arthur throughout the entire game. Towards the end of Chapter 3, Micah, Bill, Sean and Arthur are led into an ambush by the Gray family in the town of Rhodes. Micah fights back, of course, but this isn't so much him trying to keep the gang alive, it's solely for his own survival. Bill is captured during this, and although Micah and Arthur rescue him, this once again isn't a selfless act, it's so he can tie up loose ends. Even after Sean is killed, Micah still chooses to bicker with Arthur, showing no remorse for their fallen brother. Sometime later, the gang attempt one of the largest heists they have ever tried. the Lemoyne National Bank in the city of Saint-Denis. After things go wrong, such as the capture of John or the killing of Hosea Matthews and Lenny Summers, a few of the gang sneak aboard a ship trying to escape. After a storm and the vessel capsizing, they are washed ashore on a small plantation island just off the coast of Cuba. Even in this dire situation, Micah continues to berate Arthur. He seems to hate him so much. When the gang finally got off the island and returned home, Micah Bell was picked up by the Pinkerton Detective Agency, mainly Agent Andrew Milton. It is here that he struck a deal with them. Although the details are unclear, it was more than likely information on the gang in exchange for his freedom. It wasn't long before the Pinkertons, no doubt through Micah's leaks, found the Van der Linde gang at their new home in Lekay. After a vicious firefight, leaving many of the agents dead, Micah spots one who's still breathing and puts an end to him immediately. This was no doubt to silence the man in case the gang tortured him for information, just as they did with Kieran Duffy. Micah needed to maintain his cover. After the death of Hosea Matthews, among other factors, Dutch began to show signs of a slow mental decline, which Micah Bell made sure to take advantage of. He stayed by his side throughout every moment he could, whispering in his ear, influencing his decisions. He now had the position of right-hand man to Dutch, just as he wanted from the beginning. As Arthur became increasingly weaker due to tuberculosis, Micah still displayed apathy towards him, even taking every opportunity to insult him too, often giving him the nickname Black Lung. During all of this, Dutch's partner, Molly O'Shea, had been missing for some time, but later turned up in a heavily intoxicated manner. She falsely confessed that she was the one who sold Dutch out to the Pinkerton agents. She was just heavily upset and angry towards him. Susan Grimshaw made short work of Molly. If you watch closely, you'll notice how Micah's expression changes during this, as he's seeing firsthand what happens to those who betray the gang. Trying to make sure he's in good with Dutch still, Micah convinced the leader that he should kill oil tycoon Leviticus Cornwall. Most of the gang, especially Arthur, are against this, as they already had enough heat on them, but Dutch still went ahead with the plan. During this scene, as Dutch reveals himself to Cornwall, we can see that he's subconsciously still torn between Arthur and Micah. Micah was the one whom convinced him to do this, and when Cornwall asked Dutch what he was doing here, he openly admitted that he's not quite sure. At this moment, he still referred to Arthur as his best friend. Sometime later, with Micah now seemingly making most of the decisions for the gang, he began to order everyone like he was on some sort of power trip, all the while still mocking a dying Arthur. As the gang began to fall apart, Dutch felt that there was no loyalty from most of them. Micah used this as an excuse to bring in his old running buddies, Cleet and Joe, no doubt convincing Dutch that they can not only be trusted, but will be loyal to him. Dutch, of course, jumped at the opportunity to bring them on board. Micah seemed to be now forming this into his own gang. He's bringing in his own men and pulling the strings how he sees fit, all the while pushing away others that he claimed are both disloyal and potential traitors. After one final train job, John was shot and believed to be dead. When returning to camp, Michael once again showed his apathetic and schadenfreude ways. Tilly informed the gang that Abigail had been taken by the Pinkertons, to which Micah convinced Dutch to leave her behind. He also cold-heartedly informed Jack of his father's passing. While at their final camp of Beaver Hollow, Arthur Morgan returned, greeted by a black lung insult. He informed Dutch of Micah's dealing with the Pinkertons, something which he immediately denied. the gang began to separate into two groups, with Dutch divided in between, unsure of who to trust. With Susan Grimshaw pointing a shotgun straight at Micah, he took the first opportunity to put her down. The tense standoff is soon broken up as the Pinkertons arrived. As Arthur and John escape one way, Micah, Dutch, and a few of the others headed in a different direction. At first, Micah was trying to escape the Pinkertons, but soon enough bumps into Arthur and John, and the whole gang fired upon them. The next scene played out differently depending on the player's honor level and whether or not Arthur chose to go back for the train robbery money or help John escape to his family, but both instances ended the same, a showdown between Micah and Arthur to settle a feud once and for all. This is the last time that we see Arthur Morgan. After his time with the Vanderlyn gang, Michael once again regrouped with Cleet and Joe. Over time, he began to form a huge posse of outlaws. Within the following years, it was claimed that he had personally killed over 24 men. An article posted in a local newspaper stated that the recent actions of Micah Bell III could rival that of the days of the Vanderlyn gang. Sometime before 1907, Micah and his gang murdered a family. In this family was a little girl whom Cleet had tried to save. Micah took this as insubordination and tried to kill Cleet, who luckily managed to escape. Later, Micah would reunite with Dutch Vanderlyn, and the pair would finally retrieve the hidden Blackwater money, something which he'd been yearning for years. Because of his notoriety, he couldn't stay hidden for very long, and pretty soon the now-turned bounty hunter, Sadie Adler, gained some information. After finding Micah's former running buddy and temporary Vanderlyn gang member, Cleet, Micah's location was revealed. He was hiding atop Mount Hagen in the Grizzlies West. John, Sadie, and Charles fought their way through Micah's huge gang, killing all who stood in their path. Both Charles and Sadie are wounded during the intense firefight, leaving John to confront Micah, who was still riding with Dutch Vanderlyn. In a final showdown, Dutch confusingly tells John that he's there for the same reason as him, before shooting Micah himself. John put the final rounds in him to finish the job. Micah Bell III, now aged 47, died on top of Mount Hagen. Micah grew up around violence, and with an absent mother, he wasn't given much of a moral compass. He talked of his father's criminal career feats as if they were great accomplishments. This is all he understood. Micah seemed to have abandonment issues, and although he wouldn't like to admit it, he still loved his brother Amos and resented him for leaving the family and beginning a new life elsewhere. He had no respect for women, as shown frequently during interactions at the gang's camp. He would act creepily towards the girls, especially Abigail Roberts, even though she was already in a relationship, albeit complicated, with John Marston. This again may be due to his mother's absence during childhood. His wild and erratic behaviour is a result of his father. Micah was raised around nothing other than violence. He never learned how to show compassion. This is why he was able to commit horrific crimes and murders with absolutely no remorse, such as the double homicide with his father of Roscoe and Jean Briggs upon their ranch in Crawford County, Ohio, at the young age of 17. His jealousy of Arthur stemmed from his upbringing. He was used to being the top gun, just like he was when he ran alongside his father, and wanted that position once more. He had a complex of himself, although this is something he would never admit to anyone. His betrayal of the Vanderlyn gang seemed his intention all along. He wouldn't have any other reason to be carrying a bounty poster of Dutch all this time. he seemed to only stick around for financial gain and had intentions of leaving them whenever the opportunities dried up, even considering working alongside Colter Driscoll, as that gang was more his style. He was apathetic, selfish, and was only in this world for himself and his personal gains, nothing more. This has been The Mind of Micah Bell. I hope you all enjoyed, and thank you for watching.